This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today's guest is Davin Kazama, an entrepreneur, real estate investor, and leadership mentor who believes in perseverance, humility, and community. He comes from 3 generations of business leaders, and he draws daily inspiration from his mentors and his family. In his book, Making Waves, Inspiring Transformational Leadership Through Positivity, Persistence, and Aloha, Davin shares how authentic leadership and the Hawaiian spirit of Aloha can shape stronger teams, families, and communities. Davin Kazama, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me, Joe.
You're very welcome. And so, I want to start by talking about the island of Hawaii. My uncle was very fortunate to have a condo in Maui and Kihei, and I got to spend a lot of time there. And I often joke, it's like leaving another country, but still being in the United States. And obviously the love of Hawaii fuels you. It kind of inspired a lot of the book. So for folks not familiar with our 50th state, why is it so awesome?
Man, I think you hit it right on the head. I always say Hawaii is, I'm biased, but my favorite place in the world because it's like being in another country, a foreign country. You have U.S. laws, you have U.S. currency, you have English-speaking citizens. So it's great, so a lot of comforts of home. But of course, you have the legendary sunshine, the sun and, the sun and the surf, but the Aloha spirit, which is very prevalent here. People are very nice. Lots of aloha, a lot of big hearts and big hugs for everyone out there.
I love that. Love it. I'm telling you, I love the island. I hopped around. I went to was it Hilo? Or I went to Hilo. I went to the Big Island. I visited Pearl Harbor. So I got the flavor of Hawaii, which is it's one of those. It's funny too when you talk about like Honolulu and the bigger islands you have there. It's almost like you sometimes forget you're on an island because they've somehow built this incredible city on an island. Like, wait a minute. Aren't we like in the middle of the Pacific somewhere? I always found that it always kind of like blew my mind.
Yeah. We're a small island, but the downtown Honolulu kind of has a big city feel.
Sure.
Still with the small community though, that makes us real special and connects us all. So I hear what you're saying. It's a really fun place, and everyone should come and say hello. Come visit.
Yeah, and so on that, so being a New Yorker, going to Maui, and also like being a New Yorker now living in Charleston, South Carolina, I often feel like the clocks aren't the same here. And the clocks aren't the same in Hawaii. So I remember like here, when someone says, hey, I'm going to be there at 2:00, that means 2:00 Southern time. And then I remember spending so much time in Maui, and they were like, yeah, we'll do this thing at 3:00. And it's like, it's not, it's Maui time. It happens when it happens. So tell me, as a leader, how do you thread the needle of that sort of ethos and mindset of like the Mahalo vibe of, everything's great. It's all good. What's the rush? But then when you're a leader, an entrepreneur, how do you massage that? Like trying to be a successful business person, like having that like type A leader mentality, but in a world where everyone's like, yeah, man, chill out. We'll get to it when we get to it.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely the island vibe here. The Aloha spirit is we have a lot of gratitude and leniency towards others, right? But as a leader, you still have to be the one to be first in, last out. 10 minutes early before everyone else. So, and anticipating that other people will arrive late, and that's okay. And that's just how it is sometimes, even in New York, right? Not everyone's super punctual. But in Hawaii, we do call it, we're on Hawaiian time. So I get it. But, leading with that aloha where you're ready, you're set to go, you're prepared. And that's kind of the role of the leader, to be the most prepared. And yet the most lenient, because I don't know, if someone's always on time, maybe they're more prepared than you, maybe they should be the leader, right? So you have to be that person and know that, whatever it is that needs to be done to bind this team together, and build that community, whether it's being okay with people showing up late, it's okay. The long-term goals, right? That's always our goal here.
And it's funny, we're obviously speaking in broad strokes here, but from what my relationship with the Hawaiian people, very humble. And I think that was sort of what sort of slowed you down or gave you some pause to actually write this book, right? Because you probably could have written this book years ago, Davin, but you finally got to it. So how, and not to say you're not a humble person anymore, but how were you able to get over that hump? You know, in Europe, they call it tall poppy syndrome. You know, don't stick out from the rest of the poppies. You got, you know, be the same height. Don't be so braggadocious. Talk about your accomplishments. How did you finally embrace it at this point in your life to write the book Making Waves?
Yeah, man. Thanks, Joe. I love that question. It's a funny backstory because I was the CEO of a publicly traded company, and we rang the bell at NASDAQ in Times Square. And I had to give a speech, and it was a quick speech, but I didn't want the spotlight all to myself. So one of my team members came up with a great idea. Hey, how about if your daughters introduce you on the stage, at the podium, to bring you on the stage? And I was like, that is fantastic, because everything I do is really for my family, and more specifically for my two daughters. So they introduced me, and I went up and all of that, but I loved it. They were the stars of the show, and it was like, that is perfect. And then Forbes Books, or Advantage Publishing, which is a division of Forbes, contacted me and said, hey, Davin, would you be interested in writing a book with us? And I said, no, absolutely not. That's not me. I'm a back of the stage kind of guy. I'm not at the front of the stage. And it was funny. They said, well, at NASDAQ, you're pretty up front and center there. I was like, good point. Good point. But no, thank you. No, thanks. I'm not interested. And then we kept talking, and it kind of, became morphed into, what if it was a memoir to your daughters? You open every chapter with a letter to them. And then I was like, okay, very good. You guys have done your homework. And now, now I'm getting really interested. So it was really trying to share the spotlight. And the book is my way of helping to show my daughters kind of what is possible, and to kind of memorialize the things I've learned along the way. So fantastic question. And I'm still not completely comfortable with being an author and a book and everything like that. But I'm getting used to it. I was able to share a lot of the credit, so it's been fun.
That's great. And obviously, it's a book for your father to your daughters, but your father's influence is very obvious in this book to anyone who reads it. And so let's talk about dads, because my dad was sort of like the quiet one. My mom, he was the provider. He worked as a, immigrant. I'm first generation American, so he was an immigrant. He just, all I just remember seeing him is come home tired and dirty and sweaty, and he provided for the family. And my mom was sort of like the disciplinarian. She was the one who was loud, and she was the one screaming at us when we did wrong. My dad kind of just left that up to my mom. But I learned how, like, being quiet in your work and not having to tell people what you did, just do your job and move on to the next thing. So a lot of that through osmosis passed on to me. So tell me about your father's relationship to you, and how that sort of influenced not only the book and the journey you've taken, but just being a leader and being a dad.
It sounds like we grew up in very similar families, maybe even the same family, Joe. You know what? My mom was the disciplinarian. My dad was always the one working late. I remember when I was in high school, I'd drive home, and his office was on the way home, out late as a high school kid, right? 12 o'clock, 1 a.m. He's 7-story building. His corner office is the only one that's the light is still on, and so I learned that from him, whether he meant to teach that to me or not. I just noted, I just realized that, and it was modeled for me. But yeah, he was always the guy who came home late. Sometimes he'd make it home for dinner, most times not, but every single one of my games, he was there, with a camcorder or, VHS recorder, right, on his shoulder at every single one of my games. And, so no matter how busy he was always there. So I really appreciated that. And, he learned that from his father, my grandfather, who was a second generation immigrant, worked in the sugar plantations here in Hawaii. He was a black belt in judo, but he had to really humble himself because he used to deliver water to the plantation workers. And so he was the lowest of the low, and, they weren't the nicest to him. And sometimes he'd want to fight back, but then he realized, I got to stay humble. If I get into anything, I lose my job, and the dreams are kind of over. So that humility, those lessons of humility, and then I have more great stories about my dad too. But yeah, I mean, we'll go into that more. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah, definitely. I want people to read the book because I don't want to give too much away, spoiler or anything like that. But you know, it's interesting when I see generations of fathers like this. Do the edges soften? And what I mean by that is like, is your grandpa just a little tougher than your dad, and then your dad's a little less tougher than him, and you're a little less tough. You're a little more of a softie. You've got daughters, so you're a girl dad. Is that track? Is that how you've seen it play out?
yeah, I think you're right. To a certain extent, I'd say everyone in my lineage has been very lenient. You know, but my grandpa came over with $5 in his pocket, so he had to have a certain edge to him, I'm sure.
Mhm.
By the time I was old enough to realize it, he was already, somewhat successful, and so probably a little more softer around the edges than he was in the past. My dad was just probably the strictest thing my dad ever said to me was, "Hey, you got to watch your attitude." That's it. That's it. So he really gave me the latitude to learn on my own. He invested in every single one of my businesses, the first investor in every one of my businesses, and yet he was still so lenient to let me figure things out on my own, succeed, fail, whatever it is.
Oh, that's great. That's so great to hear. And so the book, you talk about leading with aloha. And so I know enough to know that aloha means hello and goodbye in Hawaii. What does it mean to lead with aloha?
Yeah, aloha can also mean love, right?
Okay.
So aloha, there's a lot of different uses of the term. It's one of the best words in language, English, Hawaiian, or anything. It's so diverse and meaningful. But to lead with aloha is with compassion. And my definition of it is to lead in service to others as well. We're gonna work together as a team to achieve this goal, and when we do, it's the glory is all of ours. It's not mine as the head guy. It's not yours as someone in the support group. It's all of us together. And what I like to do is I like to put them up in front and center when I get media interviews. I usually say, hey, go talk to this person first, and if you still need to talk to me thereafter, come let me know. And most times they don't need me, which is great. I obsolete myself.
Oh, that's great. And you talked about your grandfathers, and again, we don't want to spoil too many of the stories, but I think one of your grandfathers was a Japanese American soldier, immigrants, and it seemed like your family gravitated towards entrepreneurship. And I know for a lot of immigrants, just I mean, speaking selfishly from mine, the last thing you think about is the risk of entrepreneurship. David, if you've listened to enough of these podcasts, I have this running joke that I think entrepreneurs are psychopaths. Like, why do you do this to yourselves? Tell me about that, those early roots of your grandparents and your father and then yourself embracing entrepreneurship. Because like I said, coming from where my family was from, my mother was a Cuban refugee. My father was just kind of like this guy who came over from Spain, met my mom here in America, and the rest is history. But their whole idea of growing a family and having a happy life was having that job, working the 9 to 5, collecting the check every 2 weeks, working for the quote unquote man. But then there's the other side of immigrants who like, I want to take the power into my own hands. So can you walk me through that? Because from my experience, it's mind blowing that immigrants have the ability to do something so courageous and outrageous that can change generations for years to come.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head again. And thank you for reading the book. Appreciate that. So my maternal grandfather fought in World War II for the U.S. And it was a time where it was a very interesting, difficult time. And he volunteered for the nation and fought for the nation. So he's our war hero in the family. My paternal grandfather came from Japan, $5 in his pocket, and worked in the plantations. As I mentioned, he was staying with a friend who encouraged him to do his own business. He's something along the lines of, hey, I see it in you. You have that drive. You should do this on your own. So I think that was kind of the genesis of his entrepreneurship, and hence the genesis of the entrepreneurship in my family. And of course, my grandfather encouraged my father to do it. And my dad, I specifically remember one time sitting in the office, I was working for the family business. He comes up to my office and he says, "Hey, you shouldn't be here." I was like, "Oh, is dad firing me?" And then he said, "No, I'm going to support you. You're going to learn more out there than you will here. Start a business. I'll invest in it and see what happens."
Now,
Right.
wait a minute. At that point, had you even considered starting your own business?
Well, I had seen it, but had no idea how to do it. I was a broke college graduate. I was like, no, I can't do that yet. I need to pay my own bills first, right?
Right.
And but it's that push, right? That I really needed, and I think when you ask about what starts entrepreneurship, sometimes we think about it, sometimes we don't, but it's that person we look up to who leads us there and says, "Hey, you can do this," or "I got your back. You should do this." And I think that's where it came from for me.
Wow. And obviously, your family has become very successful over multiple generations now, including yourself. Um, but it wasn't easy. Resilience plays a big part, and that you have this line that says, "Try 8 times, fail 7. I'm one ahead." Um, where did that one come from? Is that grandpa? Is that dad? Is that you? Tell me about that mindset.
Yeah, that's grandpa. That's
Yeah.
grandpa. He had nothing to lose, as he told me. He came over with $5. He had nothing to lose, so he kept trying and learning from that failure, trying again, learning again from that failure, and so eventually he figured out what worked for him, and it was real estate development here in Hawaii, and he became one of the larger developers of a little town in central Oahu called Aiea, and really set the family up on the right path. So he was the man.
That's pretty cool. You write a lot about the authentic word, authenticity, and I always joke that the pandemic gave birth to all these words that probably existed but we never used, like empathy and intentionality. And one of them is authenticity. Tell me about that journey to authenticity for you, because I think I mean, if someone's watching or listening to this or reading your book, they see, okay, this guy has an obvious track. He's got entrepreneurship is like in his DNA. He's got people that are inspiring him to do so. But then what is Davin at the end of the day? Is he just this? Like what is behind this curtain of a very successful entrepreneur, father, what have you? Tell me about what is your authentic self? What is that, Davin?
Yeah, my authentic self is that everything I do is for my family. It's for my daughters, it's for my wife. Everything I do has them in my mind. Like, this is gonna take a lot of work. Is it gonna benefit my family, or is it gonna hurt them because I'm gonna be away for so long, so many hours in a day and years and months and things like that. So they're kind of they are at the central point of decision making for everything I do. And then as far as whether I'm gonna do something, or maybe even better, the way I conduct business, and it's about relationships, right? And I mentioned we're on a small island. Everyone here is 1 degree of separation, whether it's separated from a relative that maybe you don't even know about, or absolutely for sure there's a friend, right? So being authentic really helps in Hawaii, because if you're a jerk, that's going to get around real quick and things are going to go very poorly for you, right? Luckily, my parents modeled that we're kind, we're giving and respectful. So I think that really helps in business, that I can be that authentic person, because that gets around too, right? Hey, you should work with that person. He really took care of me, or he cares about people, work with him. But growing up in my early stages of business, I always thought you had to win every deal to the detriment of your counterpart. And one of the great lessons that I learned is the more giving, the more caring I got about the other party, the more successful I became. So one of my favorite sayings in business is, I don't need to hit home runs. I can hit doubles all day long. Home runs can be at your detriment. Doubles will be, we win together and we win over and over and over again.
That's probably a little bit of the Hawaiian side of you. I think if you were a mainland guy, you're always swinging for the fences. But maybe that Hawaiian upbringing probably helped you. They're like, those extra base hits, you rack them up enough, they can equal a lot of runs.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Deal flow is, I'm busier than ever. Way busier than when I was trying to win every deal. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's just my authentic self, and that's kind of my style of leadership and business that I've seen work best for me, and that's what I do today.
Yeah, it's working for you, obviously, David. And you kind of alluded to a little earlier about the time and whether a deal or a business is going to be worth the time, because it'll impact how much time you're going to spend with your family. And you write in the book that time is the most perishable resource. So, talk to me about how, first of all, you came to that realization, this importance of time, because I think that's one of the things I preach a lot with people is like, that's the one thing we can't make more of. Like it is what we all have, the set number of hours. We all, the most successful people and the laziest people all have the same amount of time to get stuff done in the day. The people who are successful are taking more advantage of that time. So tell me about your relationship with time, David.
Yeah, in business school, my professor said that, so I don't want to take credit for that, but he said the most perishable thing in the world is time. So be careful what you choose to put your efforts into, right? Because maybe you're selling your time too short. And so that was really profound for me. I for some reason never ever thought of it that way. And I just started getting smarter. Like, the things I work on, I want to build it once and have it pay off over and over and over again. So I'm a big fan of real estate, right? You develop it once, and if you did it right, you did your numbers right, it should keep cash flowing to you, and that's something I really enjoy. And my dad used to always say, even when he was in the hospital, on his hospital bed, he would go up to my wife, or he would call my wife over to his bed, and I say, "Is Dave taking care of you? Are you guys okay?" I'm like, "Hey, Dad, we're not the ones getting chemo, man. It's you. We're good, thank you, but we're okay." So he was very big on family time and health and everything like that.
That's so cool. You kind of mentioned about the passive income that you would get from the fact that how passive income is an incredible feature to trying to accomplish a lot, be successful, but also making money without you moving a moving a muscle. And it's so funny. Like if you go through TikTok and if you read a lot of LinkedIn stuff, it's a lot about like finding passive income. It's become like the sexy kind of income to have these days because everyone's just trying to find more ways of making money. Tell me about that, sort of the idea of passive income providing freedom for you. You mentioned real estate as one of the verticals that does that for you. But for a lot of people, they're all searching like that holy grail of passive income.
Yeah, I read that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, right, by
Sure.
Robert Kiyosaki. Everyone's heard of it, and it really kind of opened my eyes to passive income. And my dad was like, "I've been telling you that for years, Dave."
He's like, you didn't have to read that book. I've been telling you that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I just didn't put it in a pretty book. And I was like, you know what?
Yes.
You're right. You're right. And it just really gives me the family time that I want. Of course, there's always things that come up, and maybe you got to fix this at the house, or someone moves out. You got to prep it again for rent. But really, it's just that freedom. Maybe more so than the money. I mean, of course, you need money. We have bills to pay, but it's a tougher life if you always have to be in the office when your kids have time and they're young and they're willing to hang out with you, right? Once they get to a certain point, they're like, "Aloha, Dad, we'll see you in 20 years, maybe." So I think the passive income gives you the money, yes, but more importantly, it gives you that freedom, that flexibility.
Mm. And so let's break down another Hawaiian term that you use in the book, and that's the concept of ohana. So, how is the Hawaiian concept of ohana influenced how you built and led your team? So, first, let's break down that word. What's ohana?
Ohana is family, right? It's not just your blood family, it's your extended family, it's your friends who you treat like family, right? And even by extension, your friends who are that cool that you bring them in too. And in Hawaii, we really value taking care of each other. Um, you know, Rel San, the late great legendary water woman, said, "Aloha," and is you give and you give and you give until you have nothing left to give, and you give some more, right? And so that's what you share with your family. We treat everyone with respect. You treat everyone with compassion. That's not to say we're pushovers, right? Until someone proves to you that they're not worthy of being in your family circle, then you're not as cool to them. but that's ohana in everything we do in life, in business, and it's kind of the way that uh culture is built in Hawaii.
And so is that part of the nature versus nurture? Like, do you see yourself as a natural leader, or do you think this is again the nature side of it? Like, oh shoot, I was surrounded by it from my grandfather to my dad to then working in the family business. Or what? Or do you think that was sort of something that you had to grow to become a leader?
I'd say a little bit of both, because
Okay.
entrepreneurship is definitely in my family lineage. But I was always the guy just running the numbers, doing the investments from the back, right? From the back of the stage. But in leading teams, that's something I had to do later in life. And it was more that, I just found that I was very well prepared, just by laboring in the shadows. I was just always working, running the numbers, and it came to a point where I knew it better and knew the industry perhaps better than other members of the team. So, and then when an opportunity came up, or a problem came up that needed to be solved, and no one was kind of filling that role, it was like, come on, guys, someone needs to do this. And then eventually, after saying that enough times, I was like, okay, well, I think I just have to do it, right? And then I stepped into it. It was fine. It uncomfortable at first, but that's when you grow, right? When you're at the outer edges of your comfort zone, or even beyond it. And yeah, then eventually over time, with encouragement, it just became more and more, I guess, natural, or I was more at ease with it. And it's been a good ride.
It's like an overnight success that took 10 years, right? Like, all of a sudden, what a natural leader that David looks like. Like, yeah, well, yeah, it took a decade, but yes, sure. Now I'm a natural leader. That makes perfect sense. You know what's funny? So I always talk about, well, when it comes to mentorships or you're following someone's footsteps, you often hear about like taking the good qualities, like what are the best qualities? And one of the things that I found that made me successful was I had mentors and people I worked with and emulated, but I also found the things I didn't want to do. I didn't want to follow. And so I don't want your granddad or dad to catch strays here, but were there things that you saw that you were like, man, they're great leaders. They do X, Y, and Z well, but you know what? I don't want to do that one thing that they do. Is there anything that stands out over time that you were like, that you were very specific and intentional on, like, you wanted to follow these things, but not this one thing?
Yeah, I have a couple of stories for you here. So my grandfather, again, he had nothing, so he shot for the moon. Everything was all in all the time, right? Um, so, and luckily one of them hit right before things went really bad. So, and that was his style. He was the gambler. He goes to Vegas and he's high rolling all the time. My dad is the complete opposite. Doesn't gamble. Everything is steadying the ship, taking no massive chances, because things were already established, right? He just had to steady the waters. And I think I'm a blend of the two of them. Um, I take calculated risk, but when that risk looks good, I'm all in, but I do a whole ton of homework before I do it. So yeah, I'm a little bit of both. I wouldn't say that I want to gravitate away from any of them. I just kind of learn from both, right? But the second story I wanted to share is, I grew up with a lot of coaches who were dictators, right? And who led with derision and saying you're terrible and go sit over there and you're never coming back, kind of thing, and in the hopes, and I've learned that that was their style to challenge you to step up and be better. But I just felt that that doesn't work for me, right? And maybe it works for some. It just never worked for me, because a lot of the goals that I wanted to achieve were more long term, and I felt that kind of in your face dictatorial leadership is more short term. Maybe it can work for a season, maybe it can work for a year, but for goals that take 5 to 10 years, I felt another style of leadership was better.
Oh, that's so cool. By the way, your granddad sounds like a badass, because, we have this, I don't want to say stereotypical view of like Asian cultures, but it's always like you're towing the line. Everyone's going to look the same in terms of like the way they present themselves, the way they communicate. But your granddad seemed like he's like, hell no, I'm my own person. Did you guys ever talk about that in the family? Be like, where did granddad get that from? Because that's not culturally, again, broad strokesing it was not acceptable to, you know, the Japanese and even Asian cultures.
I love that, man. Thanks, Joe. I love that comment. You know, Grandpa, I guess my dad always said, you know, first generation immigrant, you know, coming from Japan, there's so much pressure to achieve, right? So you had to take big strokes or big swings. Otherwise, you go back to your homeland, tail between your legs, and you failed, you know, quote unquote. I don't agree with that, but that's the perception. So yeah, I would say that he was a badass. My wife will say that when she met him for one of the first times, she was already in a wheelchair. You know, he had gloves on because his hands were kind of arthritic. But what did he have in his gloved hands? He had Heinekens, and he was drinking Heinekens at his old age, being pushed in a wheelchair while rolling through the casino, literally rolling through the casino. So yeah, that's one of my wife's favorite memories of my grandpa, and it's super fitting. So yes.
And we talked about your grandparents, your dad, your daughters. You just talked about your wife, and I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book. And you were smart enough, as I was when I wrote my book, to dedicate your book to your wife, because otherwise you'd probably be sleeping on the couch for a little bit. But you dedicated to my wife for the best partnership I've ever signed. Tell me about the importance of your wife and how it's become just sort of like the cherry on top of everything that you've accomplished in life.
Yeah, you know, my wife is awesome. If it weren't for her, I'd be head down working just 24/7. Probably wouldn't be a very good dad, you know, because I was just so driven on my goal, financial security and all of that. And she was always the counterbalance, saying, hey, you know, how about this? This is good too, you know? But I give her so much credit because when we first got married, we had nothing, you know? Vividly remember sitting at home thinking, okay, I have two bills, one the electrical bill and one the internet bill. Which one am I going to pay? Right. And it was tough times, but it's also really dumb. I look back and obviously you're going to pay your electricity bill because without that, you don't have it anyway. Right. But, you know, young, dumb mind. But it's a funny story that she stuck with me through those hard times to, you know, to a certain sense of security here today. And, you know, without her, all of this would be meaningless. So, and got here with her and yeah, she's the best. And that's not just saying that because I'm gonna catch strays. Well, those would be direct hits, not strays. But no, she was awesome.
Awesome. Well, you can read all about it in Making Waves, Inspiring Transformational Leadership Through Positivity, Persistence, and Aloha. Davin, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Davin and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.